We're going to have a little conversation now for a few minutes. Let me just quickly introduce the panel, a small but perfectly formed panel. Fernando Machado was the president of the jury at Cannes this year, the Creative Effectiveness Jury, and is, of course, the head of marketing for Burger King. Fernando has been credited on 140 Lions at Cannes, including 5 Grand Prix, which in itself is fairly ridiculous. And under Fernando's leadership, of course, Burger King was honored with the Creative Marketer of the Year award in 2017. And of course, you know the kind of work that Burger King produced, Proud Whopper and McWhopper and all the other famous pieces of work. And before Burger King, Fernando was at Unilever, where amongst many other things, he was also responsible for the extraordinary beauty sketches for Dove. So not a bad resume. Brent Nelson is the Chief Strategy Officer for Leo Burnett in North America and was also, of course, on the jury. Brent's been awarded with 11 Cannes Lions at least. And Leo Burnett Chicago won the Grand Prix for effectiveness for the Van Gogh bedroom piece, if you remember that, in 2017. And before Leo Burnett, Brent was working for DDB Chicago, and before that at McCann. So that is our jury panel. A round of applause, please. Thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. I wanted to kick off with a bit of a contentious one, if I can. I'm sure most of you know that in order to be eligible for the Creative Effectiveness Lions at the festival, there are some criteria, and the criteria are that your piece of work must have been shortlisted or won a Lion in the previous 3 years. So the idea that we had when we launched the category was we want pieces of work that are already brilliantly creative, and now let's see if they're effective. That was the whole idea behind it. Now, every year that means that there are about 3,000 pieces of work that are eligible for entry into the Creative Effectiveness Lions. So if this industry was really any good at measuring its effectiveness, then we would have close to 3,000 entries into our Creative Effectiveness Lions. But we don't. We have about 170. So my first point is, how can we look I'll start with you, Brent. How can we look our clients in the face when the global industry can only gather together 169 pieces out of 3,000 possible pieces?
I hope you're going to start with Fernando, because he has more Lions than I do. Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I mean, if you've ever actually tried to write a case, it's extremely time-consuming. It involves a lot of time from the client. It involves a tremendous amount of time and effort on the agency. I mean, it would typically take me 5 months to write a good award-winning Grand Prix-worthy case. So I think time and investment is a big trade-off, because I always look at who's won previously, and I sit with my creative partner, Judy John, and we look at each other and go, can we best what Fernando's done? And do we have a chance, even creatively, even though we've been shortlisted or won, and then are the results going to be as good? So the bar set so high, I think sometimes you just sort of self-opt out, because you believe that you're not going to best either the gold or the Grand Prix.
Right. And Fernando, what's your view of that?
Yeah, I agree with that. You know, like if you ever wrote a case for Effie, for Cannes, it's not easy. You know, it takes months to write a good case. I think also in many cases the client is not willing to share the information. You know, so I think that limits a lot for many of the agencies. Sometimes, like the guys, yes, we know it sold well. We know it did well for the brand because the agency is seeing the variables and what's happening with the brand. But the client's not willing to open up an information, even considering that you can opt in to keep it confidential, right? But even with that, sometimes the guys just don't do it. So I think that it's not easy. Some clients don't want to share. I think that in our case, Burger King, for instance, we usually send one case, even when we have more than one campaign winning. Why? Because we put all our effort to make that case like amazing. like to polish, to make sure that the language is right. It's it's a labor of love to write a winning case. I was there judging Chicago Airbnb because I was in the jury last year. It's an amazing case. You read and it feels like, oh, it's easy because it flows perfectly. But to make it flow perfectly, to make sure that the idea correlates with the result, and to take out all the other noise that could have led to the result, because we scrutinize the case in Cannes. It takes a lot of time. So I think that's probably why I think that some clients, they self-police and only send the best of the best. It's hard to write, and some clients don't want to share the information.
I had hair before I wrote that case, not after.
Yeah. I didn't tell you I was going to ask this question, but I did get some data. Because all the pieces have been entered into the festival before, we can see what category they were entered into. Do you see what I mean? So I thought that might be interesting to see which categories end up in the Creative Effectiveness Lions. And it is quite interesting. This year, for instance, the year that you guys judged, the original Lion was won. For instance, 80 of the entries were in the promo and activation Lions. 70 of them were in PR. 64 of them were in direct, 62 of them were in media. But if we go down to, for instance, radio, only 6 of them, and in print, only 4 of them. Do you think that's an indication of how hard it is to work out the effectiveness of single medium pieces?
I don't know, because, for instance, Savlon, which was a Grand Prix, to me, is a product. It's one thing. We didn't judge the ad. We didn't judge the print. So it was one thing. Van Gogh Airbnb was an installation, right? So it's kind of like promo and activation. And sure, any good idea will land itself in PR, in social, in other things. But it was actually one thing. Mac Whopper, which also won gold in the year that that Chicago Airbnb won the Grand Prix, was a print ad. It was a Grand Prix in print on the year before. It won a gold in effectiveness. So it can be done. It can be done. I think it's more about making sure that you have the data and the willingness to produce the case. I'm sure that the case that won the Grand Prix in radio from KFC did well. It was a promo. It was a radio that was a promotion, so it for sure it did well. They could have done, but it's tough. It's not easy.
And Brent, as somebody who actually writes these cases, if somebody won a Grand Prix in print from Chicago, from Leo Burnett of Chicago, and they came to you and said, will you please win me a creative effectiveness next year, would it be harder just with a print execution?
I actually think, I think on writing the case, I actually think it's easier. I think the harder task is on the creative side, because, we all know from work, right? The more mediums you have stacked, at times there's the additive effect on that. So I actually can't think of one of our clients actually that would ever go to market in a single medium and invest, even 50% in a single medium. So I actually find attribution to a single print ad or radio way easier than what we're talking about now, even though we have access to unprecedented data. Attribution modeling is always a topic of conversation in terms of how much did that brand act, how much did that piece of technology actually lead to purchase. I find that a way more complicated story to knit together and tell it in a compelling and easy and simple way that, quite frankly, that the judges don't pick apart and find a crack to go after.
Well, on that subject, let's take a trip into the jury room at Cannes. So those of you that know the Palais, usually they're up in the very top part of the Palais, and we find the most disgusting room with no lights or windows in it. We lock the jury in for a few days.
And the coffee machine didn't work.
Coffee machine doesn't work, all that.
Cookies were a little dry.
So let's just take a peek in there. When you're judging, are your standards higher in the jury room, Fernando, than they are in real life?
I think they are, because I think that we are sending a message to the industry. So we need to make sure that whatever we award showcases the correlation between great creative and results. because like I want to be able to leave that room and say, like, you see, those guys took the leap of faith. They really pushed the boundaries in terms of the creative, and that led to a great result. So when we are judging, when the case comes, on the first page, you can see what it won. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm like, when I'm looking and a case comes, it has like 3 Grand Prix, 5 golds. I mean, I want to like the case. You know, I'm like, oh, I really hope the results are there and that the thing is well written, because I want to award that. You know, and sometimes you end up like awarding something that's a short list. Yeah, but actually, I want to award I want to show that the guys who had the courage to do something that was disruptive and different, that fortune favors the brave. You know what I mean? Like, and I want to show that as a matter. So the bar is very high. Like, we scrutinize the case. You know, like those guys, like, they are assholes, man, on that row. No, they're like, oh, no, but it's not showing this, not showing that. Well, like, but was that a function of the promotion? Like, I'm like, seriously? Yeah, like, let's read the case again. How many times did you ask to, people ask to, like, let's read the case again? A lot. Because the bar is very high.
And would you agree with that, Brent? In terms of the your daily life is often, I think, spent with clients, proving that the work that the agency does is good and effective, and that's part of your job, right? But are you more of an asshole in the jury room than you are? You're clearly an asshole in real life.
I know. Fernando just called me an asshole.
No, I said that we were.
I'm just teasing you. No, I think you do. Like, so this was, I mean, it was a really great honor to be even asked to judge. And so when you're there, you feel a tremendous responsibility, because as much as you're awarding that work, I don't want to leave the room and have colleagues and clients look at me and say, I can't believe you awarded that. Because you are setting a certain standard to prove that, to your point, that there is immense power in creativity. So other experts have judged it for creative fit and finishing credentials. And in order to move our collective discipline of marketing together, yeah, I am tougher on it, because I want to make the point for those clients who may at times be more conservative in their culture, more a little risk adverse because of their CEO or board members, that risk sometimes has massive, massive payback. And it doesn't have to be unthoughtful risk. It can be very calculated.
Yeah, and when you're, I think the other thing people are very interested in is the badly written but extremely effective piece versus the slightly less effective piece but beautifully put together case study and document, of course, because the thing to remember, what the jury see is they see the original work and then they see all the written work that's often extremely long and very, very detailed. Did you see pieces that how do you balance that? Like, are you more interested in the actual results, or are you more interested in the kind of quality of the entry?
To me, effectiveness in that sense is actually not that different than any other category. You know, you can have an amazing idea in a shitty case study, and it will hurt you. And you can have an idea that's more or less, but the case study is amazing, and it will really help you. So, of course, it helps if the case study is well written. You know, like the average case study is well written. You know, like, but because we are judging the best of the best, you know, because we need to send a signal, we will scrutinize the case, and then that's when the holes appear. But there was no case that was terrible. You know, like, it's just like, oh, I wish they had included this. I wish I could ask the marketing team that question. I wish they have presented that information so that it was not so easy to poke that hole on the case. But it's not that they are poorly written, like really bad, you cannot understand. It's okay, you know. But yes, the cases that are better written, it's harder to poke a hole. So they tend to, like, increase the chance of going up.
I don't think it's any different than when you look at a great creative idea. You can have a brilliant idea, but if it's executed poorly, it will never make the stage at Lions. Even though it's an amazingly insightful, powerful, brilliant idea, and the craft just is not there. And I think of the similar thing in a case. You could have amazing results, but if the story's not well told, it's difficult to buy into the logic. I always sort of say it, and maybe that's where I am a bit of a posterior, is I always think in the effectiveness cases, it's sort of you're guilty until proven innocent. I go in a case and assume that everyone's going to think I'm guilty. And now I have to prove my innocence, that I haven't manipulated anything. I haven't put people, like we talked about some cases where they would put you in a bit of a walled garden and there was no comparative, like i.e. increased sales 200%. You sort of sit there, what does that mean going from like 2 to 4? And against like what? What's the norm? Like, is that against what category, what convention? So.
And I suppose your advice to people here, if they're interested, I presume they're in this room because they are interested, but your advice must be to really go and read the case studies, right? Because if you look at the film of the Grand Prix winner, you could be forgiven for thinking that they were trying to make a case that a lot of retweets or a lot of Facebook likes was effective, right?
Yeah.
But the case study will have gone into much, much more detail.
One rule, a piece of feedback to Khan, if I may. One rule that I would suggest maybe to reconsider is when you send a piece on effectiveness, you cannot redo the case study. It needs to be the case study from the previous year, right? So, for instance, the Savlon case study might have been the case study for product innovation. It might have been the case study for social media, whatever. So it's not really designed for the jury. Yeah, and maybe if they had the chance to redo the case study, especially after they have a year of performance, they could pull some of that data that's more relevant to show on the case study.
Yeah, we talked a lot about that. Remember the John Lewis case? We were talking about that. One of the executions was Boxer, I think, that was sitting in there. And there's a lot of debate because they used the video from the previous year, and everyone was like, well, that wasn't the best creative of the entire campaign. So it created a lot of conversation. And so to some degree, you could argue that, to your point, the video has to be customized and show, especially for long-term effectiveness, the breadth of the 4 years of work, because it's work that I would be envious to have in my book.
Just on that subject, and we are going to have to wrap up now because of time, unfortunately, but is it more, if something comes to you in the creative effectiveness jury that has won a Grand Prix last year, has it, in its creative category, is it by definition ahead of the pack and got more chance of impressing you than something that was shortlisted last year?
When something's a big winner, I want to like it. That's what I can say. It doesn't mean that it wins. Like, I don't think Savlon won a Grand Prix on the year before.
No.
And there were other campaigns competing with Savlon for Grand Prix that did win a Grand Prix, right? So it's not a criteria that's a definitive thing, but if you believe that creativity yields better results, and if you see something that's a big winner in creativity, you want to like it. Yeah, that's how I would put it.
Absolutely. Okay, I think we're going to have to wrap up there. I hope you guys are going to stick around maybe briefly after the show, because if you've got questions, they're very friendly. I know they look scary, but they're not. They're really friendly, and I'm sure they'll be very happy to talk to you. So big round of applause. Thank you very much indeed.